So it's very rare I get introduced to a person, and immediately within the first hour of conversation with them, I just tell them to stop because I feel that the conversation where it's going can be so much more impactful. So this is what happened with this guest. So on today's show, this is Nicolas Canon, aka Nico. Nico, how are you? How's things? And where in the world are we listening to you from?
Hey Simon, first thanks for having me here. I am great, better than ever, and I'm currently in Bogota, Colombia. This is where I'm from. Home right now is Toronto.
Nico, what I want to do with this show is because you're a book of many pages, and I can really see this conversation going into so many different angles. And I'm presuming you're going to get a flood of people going over to your Instagram profile and seeing a lot more about you. Now, I know when I got introduced to you, the first thing I did was look at your Instagram profile, and I was like, holy hell, this guy has traveled. Now, what I want to do from this is open this conversation up so our audience get to know a little bit about you before we start delving into the angles of this conversation. But Nicholas, what's the story of you? What led you on this journey?
Oh, that's a big question.
It's a big podcast.
I'll t- uh, yeah, cool. Well, it actually started when I was very young. When I was a little kid, I used to be extremely shy. Just very, very afraid of people in general, especially women or adults, like anyone who had some sort of power, or if he was a girl, especially if she was pretty, I would just freeze. It was so bad that I remember when I was 14, there was a girl who liked me, and she came to talk to me, and I started stuttering and shaking. I couldn't even look at her eyes, and
Was it one of
so
those
yeah,
where
so
you completely forget your words?
oh, like not even forget my words. Like I couldn't, like I was just completely like frozen. Like my hands were shaky. I tried to say some words, and just I was literally stuttering. And I think part of this was to my parents being overprotective. And I think with good reason. Back in the day, it was the time of Pablo Escobar, and it was very common for people to get kidnapped, for bombs to be placed throughout the city. So in my parents' attempt to keep my sisters and I safe, they probably became too overprotective. They sheltered us. So I grew up being comfortable just talking to family and cousins, but I was completely uncomfortable when it came to other people. So much that if I had a question for a professor in school, I will bribe my classmates with my bags of chips or with a sandwich to make sure that they ask the question for me, because I couldn't. I just couldn't raise my hand. I didn't like the attention or anything. It was so bad that for like my first, yeah, like 10, 12 years, I remember I watched a movie where there was a kid with autism, and the kid was extremely smart, but he was completely socially awkward. And I remember thinking like, oh, I think I have that. I hope my parents don't find out. So I grew up thinking that I was autistic. That's how bad it was. And then eventually, I think the purity kicked in, and then the desire to connect and to, especially with women, was stronger than my shyness. And I told myself that I will do whatever it took to be able to be self-expressed. Because I had a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of things that I wanted to tell people, not only women but just adults. I wanted to be involved in conversations. I wanted to have a voice. I wanted to express my feelings. I wanted to express my boundaries. And I felt that this inability to do that was just keeping me in a very small life. So at that point, I made it a commitment to change this, which eventually led into focusing first on the themes of love and relationships. How do I get better with women, which is a question that most men have, right? Yeah, and then like what the chain of events that unfolded from that place. I don't know if you want me to go into detail, but it had me go through a lot of ups and downs, and and finding myself eventually helping other men overcome the shyness, the fear of being themselves, the fear of intimacy.
What I love about your story, and when we first got onto the call before, I was like, no, we stop. we speak again once we got onto the recording. Me and you had kind of like a parallel story where, for example, when it comes down to masculinity, we were probably the toxic ones when it was coming into relationships, and you don't really realize that until you hit a point. And what I loved about the conversation we had was we both had kind of done the same thing where it's like, hang on, this isn't correct. Maybe we need to start looking inwards before we start looking outwards. And that was a big thing. What I'd love to know from you and your story, and I think this could be something that comes down to the whole masculinity thing when it comes down to love and relationships, is with your story, was that something that you found and you see in a lot of the people you work with and a lot of the men who you stand up and speak with? A lot of the time we're looking for that external validation before we actually get it internally.
Well, yeah, totally. I think that especially we live in a society that doesn't have a proper education for men. There's the extremes of masculinity are, the super macho guy or the muscle guy or the bad guy who's an asshole, or on the other end, the super nice guy, who is romanticized and who eventually gets the girl only in the movies, right? So we grow up very disconnected from what true masculinity is, and very fueled by what we see on TV, on magazines, on movies. And this is, men with a lot of girls, or the men with the hottest girls are the cool ones. And I think that it gets ingrained into us, the desire to have that validation, right? And it's 100% external, because we want to be perceived as cool, as masculine. We want to be seen as the man. The problem is that we don't know what actually being a man is. So yeah, out of that, most of the men that I work with, and I include myself in that group, we go through a phase of chasing external validation, right? The bigger, faster toys, the fancy car, the fancy place, more traveling, the hot girlfriend. Sometimes, if we start a business successfully, then we want to start more and more. It's like an endless, I call it like a hamster wheel, like just we're spinning our wheels, we're running, not really getting anywhere, because the more we accumulate and the more possessions and things we get in order to be seen or perceived by, like, in a certain way by other people, the more disconnected we get from being okay with things as they are, with being able to appreciate them, right?
I totally agree with that.
I think it's very pervasive in today's culture.
So with yourself, I know, for example, what we've just spoke about there, that was kind of that was this very similar thing to what I was in. So it's like constantly chasing something, and then once you get it, you feel completely empty, and it's like, right, there's something wrong here. There's something needs to change. And it's only until you kind of hit a point of crash, break, pain, be it relationship, financial, something just falling to shit, or something that really cracks that external shell, where you really start to kind of like take those looks inwards. With the line of work that you do, where would you say, or is there any kind of like lessons you speak to guys about which really help them look inwards, kind of realize what they actually want? What is it that they're really going after here?
Yeah, so I think what breaks us is different for every guy. Some guys experience bankruptcy, and that's their wake-up call. But I found that the most common one, and I think that any guy, and maybe any woman listening to this podcast can relate, and is that the one thing that I've noticed that transforms people the most is a bad breakup. Like losing the idea of lost love, and sometimes lost hope, especially if we know and if we feel responsible for the way things went. The moment that I think, like, there's a moment for a lot of men when they just lost a beautiful woman that had a good heart, and just the relationship went the wrong way, or maybe they did something that pushed the other person away, and the guy looks himself at the mirror and he realizes that he created this, right? And it breaks his heart and it makes him reconsider everything about who he is as a man and who he wants to be. I think is one of the most painful things that a human being can experience, and also one of the most edifying ones. Like because it really makes us face like who we are and the way that we're
Exactly.
being in relationship to others.
Exactly. That was. I think you've just literally read my script. That was me in a nutshell. No, genuinely. But I see it so often now. And the big thing for me was that was the harsh realization. It was for me. It was like, oh my god. And then, like you said, it's the self realization. It's like the who are you moment, and then it just creates this huge gray zone afterwards. Which I totally agree with you. It's both painful, but then at the same time, it's a real opportunity to rediscover like who you actually are, to break down the armor that you've built up, and really just start going again and going after that thing that's a lot more beautiful than what you were covering yourself up with before.
Totally, yeah, yeah.
So,
So you can relate to the process and the feeling.
like 100%. Now, from this, where would you say, like, what do you personally feel has gone wrong in modern society? Why have we got to this point now where masculinity's got lost, men are looking up to the wrong role models? Is that the right way of putting it? Men necessarily aren't looking up to the right
Yeah.
people to get that masculinity, that energy, that male sexual energy. Where do you feel that it's kind of become disconnected, disjointed?
I think there's two parts to this question. There is the internal part, around a fundamental disconnection from who and what we are. It's I think like, yeah, it's a pervasive numbness that we experience, both men and women. So, if a guy feels completely disconnected from his body, from his heart, no woman he finds will ever be enough for him. He will always be wanting something else or something more, because when we're disconnected from our body, we like our needs can never be satisfied. The needs of the mind can never be satisfied, right? Like people who constantly eat and eat and eat, they don't eat because they're hungry. They eat because in their mind they want to eat, or they're trying to relieve some tension, right? If they were actually in touch with what their body is feeling, they will realize that they're full, that they don't need more food. Same happens with relationships between men and women. If we actually felt what our body genuinely wants, um, the the endless pursuit of new and more sexual partners will not be so big. We
So,
won't always be like,
would I
yeah.
be correct in saying from this point, it's the whole I don't feel good enough, I'm not enough?
Well, I think it just starts with I don't feel, like the good enough can come after, but just to start with that, most people cannot really feel. They can think a lot, and they sometimes confuse their thoughts for their emotions, right? Like they see something that makes them insecure, and they think, "Oh, I'm afraid." No, you're just thinking something. But yeah, it's the nothing can be ever enough if I don't feel enough, for sure. But I cannot feel enough if I cannot feel, right? Because the moment that we come to our hearts and to our body, and we're able to have all of us online and feel and be able to be okay, just walking down the street, looking at the sky, or just smelling the air. Like the moment that we're okay with something, as with the simplest of things, is the moment that we learn to be okay with ourselves. So I think back to your question, the internal part that has led society and men and relationships to go kind of in a dark direction is that we're so disconnected from ourselves. But then this goes hand in hand with I guess like a more global or society issue, which is we live in the most interconnected time, of all times, right? Like we can reach anyone across the world within a couple of seconds through our phones, right? We have, thanks to the internet, smartphones, we can reach anyone anywhere. But at the same time, we live in the most disconnected of all times, right? You walk down the street, or you're, let's say, in a bus stop, and you look around, and everyone is consumed by the device they have on their phone. Nobody looks up. Even people in a coffee shop, in the line, most people are just on their cell phone, scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, or replying emails. And it's crazy because we're so interconnected through technology, but we're very disconnected in a human way. So this has added to the mix, right? We feel more and more disconnected. The human interaction has been forgotten in a way.
Yeah.
And then we have rise to things like Tinder and dating apps, which you're sitting in your home and you don't have to talk to someone to go on a date with. Like you can literally just from the comfort of your house just scroll and swipe and get someone to go on a date with.
The endless opportunities that lie on Tinder and Bumble, the forever swipe.
Oh yeah, totally. It's like, maybe you meet a girl that you actually like, and you're like, maybe I can get a hotter one. I was guilty of that a few years ago. Yeah, like I'm a little bit shy to admit it, but I remember a time where I'm like, oh, I wanna go out with hot girls, and then I will scroll through Tinder, meet a hot girl that I liked, but maybe she wasn't very spiritual. So then I'm like, okay, I want a hot girl that does yoga, and then and then like scroll, and then I will meet the hot girl that does yoga, but she's kind of like lazy and not in touch with her like achieving financial side. It's like, I want a achieving girl that is hot and does yoga, and then I will get that, and I'm like, but like maybe her ass is a little too small. Like, these little things of like always seeking more, because we believe that there's endless opportunity, right? And in a way it's true, but it makes us objectify the opposite sex, right? It makes us see the other person as a means to get some pleasure, as a means to feel something, as a means to satisfy my needs, and not really as another human being that is on this earth with their own history, their own dreams, their own fears. Like we disconnect from the human aspect of it. And I think just that has a lot of men relate to women as like how hot she is and how much validation will I get if I hang out with her. And a lot of women to relate to men as to derive status from the man, like how much maybe financial benefits can I get, how much power, how much influence, how much security does this relationship provide me. So we relate to each other as a means to an end, and not as a human being, which is crazy.
Yeah, I see that. I think this kind of segues perfectly into the direction I really want to take this conversation with both of us. Is for me, doing the work that I do, speaking to business owners, people who are just very consumed in one area of their life, and especially when this comes down to men, I personally see this like exaggerated. The biggest thing that most people want to feel is love, intimacy, and all those sorts of things. And I genuinely see that modern society is becoming numb, like looking for things in the wrong area. And I start seeing these things start becoming like acute addictions. Now, what I'd love to get from an expert in this area is a real kind of like bullet pointed guide to discovering kind of what you're going after, and then how to build things back up and the person back out of it, and really kind of like be okay within your own two shoes, your own masculinity. How would you, Nico, if this is the case and you're a male who may be listening to this podcast and maybe feels a little bit lost, or noticing that maybe porn addiction is going a little bit high, maybe going to Tinder, Bumble constantly, getting into these loops, how would you say is the best approach for someone who may be listening to this is to Be honest with themselves, get aware, and then maybe start breaking the cycle or moving themselves forward and away from current behaviors or cycles, habits, things along the lines of that.
This is a great question. I like what you said about how can they become honest with themselves, and I think that is the very first step is honesty. I believe that awareness is curative. The things that we're aware of, we can work on.
Awareness is curative.
Yeah,
I love that. I've never heard that before. That's so true.
yeah, because if we know about it, okay, maybe we're struggling, and maybe it's gonna take some time, maybe some years to work on it, but we know it. If we're unaware of it, then it's our unconscious. It's a blind spot. It rules our life without us knowing that it's ruling it, right? So back to your question, like what I would tell a person watching this podcast that wants to, I guess, reconnect. The first thing would be that to sit down, preferably in silence, in solitude, and far away from any distraction. If possible, also in nature. I think it really helps. But to sit down and really, really, really evaluate their life, the things they're doing. And one practice that has really helped me a couple of years ago with this was because I was everything you mentioned before your question, I checked all those, like the porn addiction, the complete like disconnection, Tinder, and just no matter how good my life was, I was not satisfied.
That's
And
what I
I
keep
went,
seeing. I keep seeing this more and more and more. And as I'm working, speaking, and I get to meet all of these people, I just keep seeing all these correlations. And do you know what I mean? And this is why it kind of like drove that question.
yeah, and I realized that, like fuck, like my life is really good in theory, but I don't feel it that good. I'm always chasing something more. And I thought, I realized that, I kept chasing, the like more money, more girls, multiple relationships, crazier sexual explorations, threesomes, foursomes with girls, like all these things, and it was never enough. And I started feeling like, wow, maybe this is not the way to go. I realized there was one day that I remember I made in one day what I used to make the previous year in 2 months. And I was like, I thought that this would bring me joy and happiness, and I remember like looking at the like bag full of cash at my home and thinking, wow, like I feel very empty and very alone and very disconnected.
Yeah.
So I thought, what? I've lived my life up until this point believing that it will be more stimulation, more success, more achievements, which will bring me joy or a sense of peace and completion. And I thought, what if it's stripping away what I need to do in order to reconnect to that level of fulfillment? So I decided to go on a vision quest. I don't know if you're familiar with what it is.
I am. I'm not quite 100% sure whether the listeners would be. Could you just open up a little bit on that?
Yeah. So a vision quest is a rite of passage that used to be common among a lot of different cultures in the past. And what it was when the boy reached a certain age, he will be cast out into the wilderness, into the jungle or the desert or into the forest, and he will have to go there and spend however long he needed in solitude by himself and discover who he was and what his purpose was, and then he will have to come back to the tribe with the strong certainty of who he was as a man and knowing his purpose, or not come back at all.
Yeah.
We see like this, in the Spartans, they will cast out the child, and he will have to bring back the fur of the lion or the tiger, and proving that he is now a man, right? So it was a clear transition from boyhood to manhood in a lot of tribes. But what I liked about that it was that is that um, it will force people to go and face who they are, you know, like realize who they are when there's no tribe or community around them, when there's nothing to do, no work, nothing, where there's
when
nothing
no one
but
else is looking.
themselves. Exactly, yeah. Like who are you when you're not your title, when you're not your work, when you're not your relationships? In a lot of these traditions, also the boy will have to fast, to water fast, or sometimes dry fast. So it means there's not even food. You know, there's nothing to like. You're not thinking about what I'm gonna eat. You're just sitting there with yourself, trying to discover who you are. So I did something like that in the south of France. I worked with a shaman, and I prepared for it for like 6 months. And then when I finally got
How
there,
did you prepare for that?
so we had first there's the physical component of it, which is start with a diet, slowly cutting out alcohol, coffee, any drugs, sugar, salt, eventually cutting out meat, gluten. So slowly taking away and reducing things, getting close to more or less like a raw vegan diet, close to the days that I was gonna go into the forest, to the mountains. So that was the physical aspect of it, just training and doing intermittent fasting for the last 2-3 months prior to that. So just to train my body to be okay without food for long periods of time and to slowly detox it. So
Would I
so when I get
would I be correct in saying that a big thing about that aspect is to take you away or to get in control of consumption? Is it consumerism that they do that for?
I think the first reason is health, because when you go into the wilderness and you're fasting, if you haven't detoxed your body prior to it, the second day without food, you will go into your body will go into detox, and you'll get headaches and sweat and just have a very bad time. But if you're in nature and your body already detoxed, then you don't have to go through that part. So your level of awareness and conscience is like it's easier to connect or to drop into that space of healing, of understanding. That's the number one reason. Number two is it's like it's slowly reclaiming my ability to choose, my power of will, right? Like
Yeah.
realizing that I get to choose what I put in my body, I get to choose when I do it, and not, because we want to carve our own path. We don't want to be just reacting to our instincts, right? And one of our most basic instincts is hunger. So we want to tame that. So when we get to that place, we are in control in a way. So that was the part of the preparation. The other part of the preparation was because I was leading a group of men around an inner exploration, because they were going to go on the vision quest as well. So we had weekly calls around different themes, trying to understand better purpose, sexuality, vulnerability, authenticity was a big one of them. So this month leading up to that was a constant exploration of who am I as a man, and where are my edges. Up until what point do I understand who I am? Just so when we got to the vision quest, we knew exactly like where, like we had a strong understanding of where we're at and where we need to go, of where the challenges are for us. And so I got there, and then like we prepared. We did a temazcal, which is a sweat lodge, and then after that, the shaman prepared us, and each of us took a different path. We had to take a canoe across the river, and then just literally just like go through the river for like half an hour, and then just get off the canoe, tied to the dock, and walk inside the forest, and find a place that was supposed to be our spiritual place, a place that called us, or that we felt like comfortable in. And in that place, we were meant to spend the next 4 days and 4 nights with nothing but a hammock and 2 gallons of water. That was it. And I remember through that process, the first couple of days, it was almost like agony,
Yeah.
Not out of hunger, like I didn't feel hungry at all, but it was just sitting with my mind, like it's like there's nothing to do, and then now I'm feeling bored, and the time is going by so slow, and I'm thinking, what do I do? They
Well,
allow
I
us to bring
what I
go
love
ahead.
about this, Nico, is I love how so. Oh, well, we've had quite a couple of like masculinity people come in and talk about this, and they always say separation is the key start. Start with separation. Now, I love in your story how you planned to separate, and what I was just thinking of into my own story. I stumbled into a trip to Peru, which basically disconnected me from everything, and I found myself into a similar position where we're in jungles, lodges, you've got no signal, rations of food, and you've just got water. And when you were saying then, you're just going through the whole thing of like, shit, I'm bored. I, I know with yours it was like much more extenuated, but it was a similar thing within my own world. Where was that's what happened, and I can just I can totally relate to that initial point, the first time where you're alone with your own thoughts.
That's amazing, yeah. But yeah, like a separation time and solitude is, especially for the masculine, is very necessary to find his purpose. Um, but yeah, so the first few days were, just boredom, and it's facing the fact that, it's like, wow, like I'm so overstimulated in my day-to-day basis that I cannot find peace in solitude, right? And it's facing that, and it's becoming brutally honest with ourselves, like, fuck, like how, like what do I do with myself? I cannot work, I cannot flirt with girls, I cannot work out, I cannot eat, I cannot
Swipe right on Tinder.
yeah. So that is like, wow, like, I think most humans, we ongoingly run away from that sense of emptiness, that void within us, that's that idea of maybe meaninglessness that is underneath all of it, and we get distracted. That's why we have entertainment. That's why, that's why we do most of the things that we do. And I remember thinking that, like if you want to have a good relationship, you have to spend time with a person, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you want to fall in love, then you have to really spend time with that person, get to know them, get to understand them, what they're like, what they don't like, etc. And I thought about that. I'm like, wow, like how much time have I actually spent with myself? Not socializing with people, not writing down goals, not watching a movie. No, like literally with myself, just sitting, like with my conscience, with my thoughts. And before that vision quest, I realized that here and there, just maybe an hour at times, but not that much. And I'm not surprised that there's such a self-love issue around the world. And people are like, oh, how do I have a better relationship with myself? And when they ask me that, I'm like, well, like, do you have any relationship with yourself? How much time do you spend with yourself? Most people spend next to zero. They think that watching a movie on their own is
Do
time
you
by
want to know what
themselves.
really hit me on this? I got a keynote at an event, and I asked the audience. I was like, we went through a series of questions, just cueing the audience from what we were going to speak to. And I asked the question, and I saw this as well on Rachel Hollis did a female empowerment event. And I said, how many of you here like actually like yourselves? How many of you like love yourselves? Like, keep your hands up if that's the case. Literally, there was no hands lifted up in the room. It was 3, 4, 5% at most, and that for me was where it really hit me. I was like, oh, this is a problem. And like, obviously, talking with what you're saying here is to get love, intimacy, and to really like create those relationships that matter. It all starts with yourself.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it starts with having a relationship to ourselves.
yeah, so this is what I'm loving about this is because it's really bridging this gap. Is if we can go into this of how do we recreate that relationship with yourself. So
Yeah, so the first thing is actually spending time with ourselves. That means, meditation is a way to do that, or literally just going for a walk. Like just, it's not watching a movie. It's not necessarily, going for food. It's not necessarily sitting down and writing things. It's literally just being present to what comes up in our mind, in our heart, and just listening. I think
my
that's
question
the first step. Just
my
yep.
question back to you here is then when you were isolated in your hammock and with that little bottle of water, what started to come up for you?
Yeah, so I was gonna go there, and so first 2 days it was like this, like dread and numbness, and then I remember we're the shaman asked us to do a death lodge ceremony. She said, well, that I think it was the third day, like there's gonna be a full moon, and she said, from the moment you wake up that day up until late at night, you prepare for death. You convince yourself and you tell yourself that when the moon hits, the peak of the sky, you will die, and you sit with that the whole day, and she like you sit with that and you spend your whole day preparing for death. You think who you need to forgive, who you need to ask for forgiveness, like you take inventory of your whole life, and you make peace with that. And I woke up that day, and I was really committed, because I really wanted to understand this, to understand myself, I wanted to love myself, and I wasn't doing that. So I woke up, and I literally convinced myself that when midnight hit, I will die, like of starvation or something, I don't know. And the whole day I was contemplating that, wow, like how do I feel about death? And a big part of me was like, what, I feel kind of good. I traveled, I followed the things that I was passionate about. I fell in love. I tried to, maybe I wasn't the best boyfriend all the times, but I did the best that I could, But then when I started going deeper, I started realizing how much time I had literally wasted doing meaningless things,
Yeah.
The one thing that cracked me in that moment, and brought me to tears, was I remember thinking, like, one of my only regrets if I died that night was that I didn't get to spend enough time with my family. So I moved out of home when I was 16, and I lived most of my life abroad. And I realized, wow, like, and I love my family. I love them so much. I realized, wow, like I would have liked to spend more time with them, with my mom, my dad, especially my grandma. And then I remember thinking that, like, how happy I am every time that I call my grandma, and she's so full of life, and it's just so contagious. And then I remember that it had been probably like 3 or 4 months since I last called her. And then I realized, wow, like I have not spent 20 minutes to call my grandma, whom I love so much. Yet I've spent countless hours swiping on Tinder, talking to women I never met, or sometimes going on dates with women I couldn't care less about, or in connections that were not right for me, spending time, resources, everything. And it just put everything into perspective. I started realizing, wow, like I spent also so much time pursuing things that I don't really need, trying to please people that I don't like that much, people I don't care that much about. So I was there in the middle of the forest, just crying, thinking, wow, like, if I had a second chance, if I didn't die tonight, I would love to actually do what's meaningful for me. I realized there's so many things I want to do before I die. swiping on Tinder or trying to collect more money or chasing girls is not what, like, they're not one of them, and that for me was a wake up call to a call to shed a layer, to let go of things that are not important and are not meaningful for us, because we do a lot of the chase of more has to do with being liked and wanting to be liked by other people.
Yeah,
And we forget to do.
that's a
Yeah,
lot of people are doing things that they don't like to buy things to impress people they don't actually give a shit about, and it's sad, isn't it? But that's kind of what's going on at an epidemic level these days.
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy, and it's because we're so disconnected. Um, yeah, we cannot be at peace with ourselves. And so yes,
I have to say, when going back to the whole peace thing, I can remember when I was in that chase. It was definitely, there was no peace, but there was a hell of a lot of like low level anxiety that was always buzzing away in there as well.
oh, I can relate to that totally
Yeah.
because if we don't get it's literally an addiction. If we don't get our next dose, we start feeling like we're not worthy or we're not good. Like if we don't get the validation of another success, if we don't get the validation of another sexual conquest, of like something new, we take it personal because we place so much of our value on the things that we achieve that we forget to, or sometimes we're just not able to find value on who we are just because we are. I think a lot of people have trouble with that. They 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 derive their sense of worthiness from their contribution,
Yeah.
and then when they feel they cannot contribute or they're not contributing, they don't feel at peace. And it's like this underlying anxiety that is like, oh, you do something, do more, achieve something else.
Do you know what I find crazy about this is we numb ourselves predominantly to the things that we want to feel the most, but then as a result, we get the things that we don't want to feel, like the anxiety, the like low level depressions and things along the lines of that. It's like we've become numb to what we are actually in chase for, but then we
Oh,
actually feel,
100%.
oh
It's so funny that you mentioned that, and I have a very like interesting example of this. When I was in Bali, um, I ended up meeting a porn star, a famous porn star girl, and I was just fascinated to understand her story and her life. Because it's a career that is so shamed by most of society, and but anyways, I was just very curious, and also to understand what is her love life like, um, and then so I'm talking with this girl, and I asked her how she got into porn and how she feels about intimacy and love, and she tells me, she says, you know what my biggest fear is around men, and I'm like, what is it? She said, I'm so 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 afraid of being used just for sex,
huh?
so I started doing porn. Yeah, and I'm like, what? Like you're afraid of men using you and treating you like an object, and therefore you become a porn actress. And in her mind, it was, I think, the the agreements within the industry are very clear, right? Like they're there, they work, and then they leave, and there's no emotional attachment, so she feels kind of safe. But it's reminded me that sometimes we numb ourselves to what we want the most, which is like intimacy and connection and love, and but we put ourselves in places that have us experience that which we're afraid of
This
unconsciously, right?
this is amazing that you've said this. I was speaking at one of our mutual friends, Justin's events, and it's the first time in my life I've ever been quoted, so I'm really proud of this that it made itself onto a quotation on social media. But I said, like, with the ego is there to keep us safe. It's our safety mechanism at the end of the day. And through the actual quote that got used was like, people don't realize this, but the actual whisper of the ego that goes through your ear is actually taking you on a path to the place where you fear to go most. And I see this all the time. It's like the thing that we don't want to happen the most, or the thing that we're trying to stay safe from. If we keep doing that same cycle of behaviors and actions or whatever that keeps telling us to do, we always kind of end up there. We drift off to it. And it's crazy because you're saying this, it's the same thing within this story again. It's like that's what she didn't want, but she kind of ended up on a path to that.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy because it's so common, but at the same time, we most people are unaware of that. They're unaware that what you said, I think, was very profound. That the ego is leading us to the place that we want to avoid most. Yeah, I am, especially this year, I am 100% convinced that every pain, most suffering and pain that we experience in life stems from our inability to listen to, some people call it intuition or their heart, or to actually like trust our, I guess, like inner wisdom, the one that leads us to the things that feel aligned and harmonious. Every time that we listen to that voice that is like full of fear and anxiety, we make decisions that have us end up in places of pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's crazy, isn't it? I know when I look back and a lot of the things I did, like mine took me on a journey of doing bloody like a lot of people look at me now and they're like, you used to what, like photos and like body modeling? And I'm like, yeah. But a lot of the time it's like we do the things for everyone else, but then the person inside is the one that's getting hurt the most from the actions that we're doing to please everyone externally, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
crazy path.
We want for everyone to like us, and we leave ourselves last in line.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
unliking ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Unliking ourselves. I'm loving the way this conversation's going because these are the things that I really feel that are mounting up in my inbox, especially from, this is what hurts me the most. It's coming from young males or younger entrepreneurs, like entrepreneurial males as well. So I really feel this is going down a path that can help people carve this out. Now, let's flip this back to your story again. So obviously you separated. So what happened is you went on the vision quest, you separated, you really kind of worked out what was important to you. Like if you were going to go tomorrow, like what is important to you at the end point. And I know in my own story, that's a similar thing what happened, not in the same approach as you, but you separated, you really found who you are, what lit you up and what was important to you. Then what was the next steps from that?
Yeah. So the next step was, in that process of separation, I got to see what's important, what's genuinely important to my heart and my life. But B, I got to see everything that's in between me and doing or connecting to that which is important. A lot of people think, when I work with my clients, they come and they think that aliveness or intimacy or connection or feeling at peace is a skill that they have to develop. They think that they have to learn how to be happy. They have to have a ABC 1, 2, 3 bulletproof list of steps that will make them happy. And it's not like that. I think that if anything, and one of my mentors uses this metaphor, and it's like, we are like corks in water. If we're left with any kind of tension, we float effortlessly, right?
Yeah.
However, if we grab the cork and we hold it, um, we can keep it underwater, and then we're wondering like, oh, like what do I need to do to float? What do you need to do to feel good again? What do we need to do to come to the surface? And we feel all this tension, and we think that the tension is because we don't know what to do. And the only thing that we really have to do is let go of the tension, to just to let go of the cork and let it come up. We're all, as children, very connected, very intuitive, very curious, full of life, at peace, um, so it's not something that anybody teaches us. Every like baby and kid and animals have this too. They live in a place of constant presence and play. And as we get older, as we grow, things happen. Life happens. Sometimes trauma, sometimes bad relationships, sometimes pain, and we start covering and that part of us that is very, well, that was in love and at peace in every moment. We put it on the side because we develop belief systems or ways of reacting and seeing the world that start to clutter the space. So back to your question, uh, through solitude, through the separation, we realize the things that come up. There will be emotions, and for each of us, they're different. And these are the things that to get to a place of fulfillment and joy. We don't have to seek fulfillment and joy because that's our default operating mode. We just have to remove everything that is in the way of that coming to the surface. What's on the way, that's something that we discovered through separation. For sometimes in the way it's a sense of sometimes anxiety, sometimes there's anger, sometimes there is sadness or grief, sometimes there's a sense of disconnection, and we have to face these emotions, in order for us to reconnect. We have to make sure that we also embrace that part of us that feels wounded, because the disconnection is that we're in a way trying to shelter that fragile part of who we are, right? And we shelter it by putting up walls and walls and walls. And what we need to do is to, like break down the
Yeah.
walls and embrace it, come to terms with it, father our own child. I think this is key. Is there's no way around it, and I see it. Everyone that I meet who is depressed, it is 100% that there's an emotion or a set of emotions that they are not willing to face and feel. Everyone that I see that is this is crazy. Like everyone I see that is overweight, and no matter how much they work out, how many diets they go on, they cannot lose that excess weight. There are emotions they're not willing to feel. They're stuck. There's energy that's stuck on their body, and I've seen it also so many times. Like I have a client from Argentina. I think he's a 45-year-old guy. He was really overweight, and we started working last year. And the moment that he made peace and he's feeling the sadness of his divorce, the grief, but also the pain of how disconnected he felt. And, the moment that he allowed himself to cry the tears he had to cry and feel the feelings he had to feel, and he let go of them, literally in a couple of months, he lost 17 kilos, with very little exercise
I,
and without
I,
changing his diet that much.
Nico, I love the fact that you're saying this. I can remember through, it's about 6-7 years ago, one of my first mentors who really got me out of a cave basically said to me, like, look, like if you're feeling low level depression, it's a lack of expression. It's like, what are you not physically expressing? And I love that you kind of speaking from the same hymn sheet, the same message. Is that?
Yeah, I see it. It's um, that which we're not willing to feel and express, and and let go of, is it starts ruling our lives, because we don't want to feel that sadness or that pain we felt before. So we create these walls around it. We create these ways of reacting, these ways of avoiding life, so it can't touch us. And one of the things that I found to be true is that if we want to be open to love and joy and profound like fulfillment, if we want for for a sunset or a sunrise to touch us to the point of tears, if we want to live with an open heart, we have to embrace the fact that we will get hurt, that sometimes things will fail, that we will experience pain, and we have to embrace the pain, because they say everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And it's true. We only want the good things, and we don't want to accept that there's going to be times of grief, of sadness, and that's a beautiful thing. I think back to what we spoke about at the beginning. Heartbreak. I think heartbreak is one of the most beautiful times in a person's life, and I say it in a sincere way, because it's a time where we, I think pain is not bad. Pain is it's a part of life. We are born into pain. The process of birth is one of the processes that most painful for women, right? Even for the baby, it's just there's a lot of blood and tears and tension. Pain is mandatory in life. Suffering, however, is optional, right? We get to develop our relationship to the pain that we feel. And pain has one purpose, and it is to bring awareness to the present moment. Why? Do you know there's I forgot the name. There's a disease, and there's some people who are born without the capacity to feel pain. If they get caught, or if they get punched, or if they get burnt, their nervous system does not register the pain. And these people, they don't live very long. Most of them die very early. Why? Because maybe they get a cut that they never notice, and they get infected, and then by the time they discover that there was something wrong, it's already too late. And it's true, when we get some sort of physical pain, like a cut, it forces us to be present, to pay attention to that, to care for it, right? I think pain is one of the only sensations that we cannot normalize. We can always have more pleasure, more fun, more, they call it hedonistic.
Yep. I always think it grounds you. I think it's just an immediate grounding. Bam. You hear, this is how precious it is. Bam.
It's a shock to your system that makes you it forces you to be present to that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Any pain that we feel, heartache, back to my example, it forces us into the present moment to evaluate what's happening and to make something out of it. So back to the question of embracing the things that we don't want to feel and making peace with those things that we're running away from. If we change our relationship to pain, and we can see those things not as what we should be afraid of, but rather our path to salvation lies in embracing the things that we feel most scared of.
I like that. I like the way you worded that. So again, would this fall back? So if we're going to put a message out there which can help our listeners, would this again fall back to becoming aware, doing certain awareness work around that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So I guess if I was going to put it into a concise, first, separate. Second, become aware of what's truly important to you. Third, become aware of what's in the way of that, and feel it. Just this these three things, they will provide massive healing for people. Once we were able to feel these emotions, we were able to let them go. Once we let them go, there's more space to feel, and less fear of feeling. So we get a little bit more in touch with our hearts, with our body, with our mind, with nature, and with others. Because also we start to see that in everyone that we meet, we can see the same pattern. We can see how the person who's angry, or the person who is rude, or the person who treats others poorly, or who's reactive, we learn not to take it personal, not to judge them, but we learn to see the pain that they're feeling, and how, the pain that we're not willing to feel and heal is pain that we want others to feel. Everything that we don't want to experience ourselves, in a way, we want others to feel it. We want to put it out somewhere. And
Nico, just
yeah,
on that, is that where, for example, this can kind of cross over into a multitude of areas. If people aren't expressing emotions, this can be singular or in a relationship. Is this where certain things lead to projection?
100%, yeah, like 100%. Um, yeah, if we don't voice the things that we're feeling, because we don't always know. I think, like, the more work that a person does on himself or herself, the more in tune they get with other people. And then you start becoming very, very sensitive and able to read other people and their emotions. But before we've done any work, we really don't know. So, and the only way that we can know what other person is thinking or feeling is by expressing things. Sometimes maybe maybe we're in a relationship and our partner looks at us in a certain way, and we think, oh, like she's being bitchy, or she's being distant. And then we start becoming more and more distant, and then we don't express that, and then we start projecting, and then maybe she does something else, and we now have a lens through which we're filtering all her actions. And we filter that person through our lens, and then we disconnect from them. And it's because we're not willing to feel and express what's happening. I remember, like, a quick story around this, and it was, for the longest time, I was in a way scared of my dad, and I loved him so much, and I was scared of him, not in a bad way, but he always felt like this distant businessman who didn't want anything to do with emotions. And I think I was like 22 or 23 years old, and I remember I had never told my dad that I loved him, but I really, really loved him, and and he was the person who inspired me the most. And I went to a workshop in which they, in a way, at one point, like, they more or less, like, forced people to make that one call, to tell that person that they knew they had something to tell them, and to face these things. But before doing that, to share with that person what you were feeling, what you were projecting. And I remember, like, I procrastinated. I left it to the last minute, but then I pick up the phone and I call my dad. And by this point, I'm already, like, stuttering and almost crying. And I tell him, like, Dad, like, I've seen you all this time as this disconnected business guy who wants nothing to do with emotions, and, like, you want to be a fighter, not a friend. And and I felt disconnected, and I felt sad. But I wanted to tell you that I really love you, and that I want to have a close relationship with you. And I was crying at this point, because I had never told him that, and it was very vulnerable for me. And he's like, "Oh, son, I love you." And then he's like, "Oh, like, I've always loved you, and I've always wanted to be close to you." Yeah, he was shocked, and I realized that his way of showing love was caring. He was like, "Hey, did you eat? How's school going? Do you need money?" That was his way of, being attentive, was the way in which he expressed love. But I
It,
saw every time that he has, yep,
I was just saying, so it was through acts of service that he showed it. That was his way of,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, acts of service. And but I saw every time that he asked me about how was school, what I saw through my lens was, oh, like I need to be this overachieving kid to earn my dad's love. Like if I'm not doing well enough in school, he's not going to love me, you know. So completely my perspective, completely my projection, and because I had the lens around him, uh, everything that he said, every word came from a place of, oh, like I thought he was judging me, or he was trying to like rate me or measure me against some ideal, and he was far from that. You know, he was just showing love. But it was only until I expressed my love for him, and I also expressed my disconnection and my fear of this and that we were able to clear the space in between us and to actually get to the truth of the relationship, which is I love him, he loves me, and we both want a better connection. Um,
Oh.
and that's what, and it's what you said, when we don't express our emotions, we project because we create a filter through which we run everything that the other person does and says.
Nico, with that, how would you say it's best for people, for our audience, to really work out what filters they're operating from? Because your story is very similar to mine. And I know as soon as you can change the way that you see the world and the way that you perceive the world is, it really can open amazing, beautiful doors. Have you got anything to kind of add to that, where people who may feel the same, or may kind of like this conversation might have created some inquisition? Have you got any ways where people can maybe look and see what they're viewing, or see how they're viewing certain things, certain areas of their life?
Yeah. So I think something very practical that helped me a lot is to differentiate our story from what is. You know, back to my example. What is my dad asked me how am I doing and how school is going. My story is he's measuring me. He wants me to be an overachiever. He's not going to love me if I'm not doing good enough. So saying maybe our partner says something to us and then we go into tension. So always to remind ourselves, okay, what's the what's so of this space? Oh, she said these words. Okay, what's my story around it? And then to really acknowledge, the emotions I think that I'm feeling. And from that space, we learn to see, and we can check with reality. I can come to my partner and say, wow, like when you looked at me this way, or when you said this morning, I felt angry, or I felt like you didn't love me, or I felt like you were annoyed at me. And I'm curious, like, what's your experience like? We're able to confront our stories with reality, and we will start to find out that most of the time our stories have nothing to do with the way things are. It's just our filter. So the more that we're able to differentiate the what is so from the story we're telling ourselves, the more we can let go of these stories ongoingly and become more and more present to the conversation. So for example, like right now, the what so is I'm talking to a screen and I'm listening when you speak to me, right? Maybe the story that I have at some point is like, oh, maybe I want to say something that people enjoy and understand. I want people to like me on this episode, or I want it to be useful, So this is the story that I'm telling myself. But the what so is we're two men having a conversation, right? And I think that the more that we're able to connect to that and let go of the story, the more pure the connection, but also I found that the easier it is to be in this space, right? It's easier for me to connect to you, Simon, when I'm not thinking of you liking me or me wanting to be liked by your audience. I can have a more honest conversation when it's just, like two friends chatting. And I think it's the same in every relationship in our life. The more that we're able to stick with the what is, and we let go of our stories, the more we can actually nurture a genuine connection with that person. Because
I love you've just said this. I absolutely love the fact you've just said this. It's like as soon as you remove the expectation of the situation, you get a much better connection. Both. It really is, isn't it? Yeah.
You have a way of like condensing things in a very and succinct way. I love it.
I appreciate that, mate. I appreciate that. But that's what I love what you're saying. It's just you kind of, I think because I go through my life and I help people and all that sort of stuff. And then you sometimes don't really realize what's going on until you're having conversations with other people that are doing the same thing. And then you kind of connect the dots looking backwards. So I feel that that's what this does. And this is what allows us to help people further. So I also strongly agree. I was like, as soon as I started to remove the expectation with any conversation, be it in business, life, relationships, it then made the connection so much more powerful with the individual. So from your own way of putting it across, that's where I can then start to go, oh, that's why. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also this is for example, in relationships, we tend to have a story of our partner, and we build a relationship to that story, not to our partner. So sometimes, maybe we think we're with a girl who's very innocent and good and well behaved, and that's our story of her. And then she does something that is completely opposite to that. Maybe she's very wild, or maybe she, something different. And then we feel all this tension, and we're like, oh wow, like she changed so much. And it's like, no, like she didn't change. It was just that I had put her in a box of who I thought she was, and then suddenly I'm just faced with the truth, which is she's not this box. She's not a label. And I think that's we do that with relationships. We through our stories we put a box around the other person, a business partner, mentor, student, and we relate to them as the box we put them in, and it just robs us of a wider range of possibilities. Like let's say like if I saw you only as a podcast guy, then maybe my relationship to you will be, okay, what can I say that's going to be of value to you and your audience? But if I let go of that story and I embrace, there's this cool guy I'm having a conversation with, if I open up myself to the possibility of a friendship, for example, then our conversation is going to go in a lot of different ways, and the connection itself has more room to evolve in an organic way instead of being forced to stay within a certain box. And I think that back to the topic of intimacy, connection, being present. Being present is to be fully open to anything and everything that life may bring in this moment, right? And we cannot be fully open to that if we are attached to our story of how life should be or how we should be in life.
100%. I think if I can just jump back from this conversation, jump up into the air and just take an overlook of what we've just spoke about, I genuinely feel that with this sort of stuff, it's the forgotten art of communication. It's how we actually go inwards, speak to ourselves, see ourselves, how we communicate outwards. It just seems that that's the biggest thing here. We're getting more and more disconnected because the lack of communication, both with, do you want to call it soul, heart, the way that we feel, all the way through to our emotions, to what's going on externally. It seems that this is where all the disconnects starting to fall. Does that make sense? So it's like if we can really lock into how we communicate with ourselves, with the external world, with how we see the world, then it really just it allows us to be a lot more open with things.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And I mean, communication, I think communication goes hand in hand with being present, right? So it comes down to, like our inner narrative, how we talk to ourselves, the dialogue we have, but above all is about just our capacity to be with ourselves as we are, without clouding that space with stories or beliefs or things around that. Being able to be with other people in the same space, like to be fully. And I think I see everything is so interconnected. To have more fulfillment and let go of the rat race and the hamster wheel, we have to be present enough so we can actually enjoy our life moment by moment. If we want to be able to heal and connect to our hearts, we have to be present, present to what we want, present to our pain. If we want to connect with other people, we have to be fully present, present to who they actually are and not to my ideas and thoughts of who they are.
On that note, have you seen, do you know a guy called Phil McKernan?
Nope.
Okay, so Phil McKernan has done an amazing. I strongly recommend anyone who has listened to this conversation and feels that they need to detach, kind of go internal and kind of find themselves a little bit. Phil McKernan's done an amazing documentary called Give and Grow. And basically what he does is he takes these high-performing professionals who are really attached to the corporate identity and all that sort of stuff, and he removes them from them and takes them to underprivileged places like India and stuff along the lines of that. And it's exactly like the way this conversation's going. He takes people away from their environment, separates them, does a load of self-work, and the majority of them come back and they go, do you know what? This is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is kind of what I've been doing. I'm so far off track. And then I think 95% of the people that went with him on this documentary and this experience end up coming back and they're like, look, the way I'm living at the minute is not in line with who I am, what I'm about, what I purposely feel that I should be living. And they all literally change their lives directly after it. It's a really, really powerful documentary. You should definitely watch that.
Oh,
Give and Grow.
I literally just typed it on my notes because it sounds
it's brilliant. Beautiful. But what happens is there's a really powerful part of this where there's a young girl who's got absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing, and she just sits and makes things from string and all that sort of stuff. And she says to the camera, she's like, I can see more pain. These people came here thinking that they would see us as the painful ones. And she's like, I actually can see these guys are in a lot more pain and suffering than us. And she starts giving them all gifts that she's made. And it's a really touching moment of the documentary. And you kind of just see that. Do you know what I mean? It's when people remove all of these things, they remove the armor, they remove everything that they've covered themselves up with and are cracked through to the actual person who's there.
Yeah.
And it's So really is art of communication with self.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch it.
You need to watch it. It's good. You have to let me know how you crack on with that. So, Nico, what I want to do here is let's start wrapping these things up a little bit. What I want to start doing first things first is let's just go over this whole conversation because I think with me and you, we can just go into so many different topics. But if we just flip this back to one given guideline, I want to get on here something that can go away and give our audience, how can we give a bullet point, breakdown, statemented, portionalized version of if you're struggling to feel, if you want to feel more love, if you want to feel more intimacy, you want to remove the numbness and start getting, actually feel the things that you want to feel. What would Nico's guides be to that? What would your immediate bullet point, statemented, condensed version of Nico's world be for that?
It's funny. This question makes me laugh because I get it very often from students, especially. And we talk about the journey from the mind to the heart. From overthinking and overanalyzing to living from a more embodied way. And then I spent time talking with the client and sharing with him the importance of taking a deep breath, being present, being in their body, and then they ask a question like this, and it makes me laugh because it's like okay, how can I how can I use my mind to get out of my mind? How can I make the 1, 2, 3 ABC thing so I can get out of the habit of doing 1, 2, 3 ABC?
It's the magic pill question.
Yeah.
Wait, what magic pill can I take right now
Uh-huh.
that's going to help me feel this way?
Yeah, but or like when I show you guys, you have to be more present, and they're taking notes. Okay, be more present. It's like you're missing the point. I get the use of the question. So I guess practical thing that I will give is but we already went over that, and it's like if you have the chance, or if you don't have it created, to spend time by yourself, ideally in nature, if not just at home, but just create some distance where you are distraction free, and you can actually start to develop a relationship with yourself. Start to see what's happening, what comes up when you're not distracted. Second, when something comes up, feel it. Don't numb it. Don't repress it. Just breathe through it. Become aware of where in your body are you feeling this tension, this energy. How big is it? What does it say to you? Why are you feeling that? And let it go. Once you've maybe cried your tears or felt what you need to feel, let it go, and then become in touch with the things that truly speak to your heart. Because those are the things that will make you come the most alive, and they will really fill you with joy. Back to the documentary you were talking about. These guys had this profound experience through giving and through helping people that changed their life. It made them become very in touch with their nature and with the things that they need to change and with the things that they want more of. So it's just the same, like to create space to do these kind of things, and maybe let go of all the things that are so necessary. And if I was to give a single exercise for men and women that will have them feel a lot more, have a lot more aliveness in their life, that will have them face the things that they don't want to face, and will have them very quickly transform their relationships, their career, their finances, is to speak their truth. It's wow. to look at another person, but not to speak it, to speak it and own it and feel it, because it's easy to tell someone, oh, you're being an asshole. No, you look at the other person in the eyes and you share the truth of what you're feeling. Wow, what you just said made me feel very unpleasant. I feel really angry right now, or I don't agree with this, And then you don't disconnect, because we have the tendency you stay present to how that feels in your body. If we do this often enough with people, we start doing it also with ourselves, and we create a habit of speaking our truth, even if it hurts, even if we're afraid, even if it feels uncomfortable. So this practice alone, I think, it has changed my life, because it encompasses a lot of things. To speak my truth, I have to be aware of my truth. So I have to slow down just enough to know what it is that I'm feeling, so I can speak it. But I also have to be vulnerable, because I have to put it out there, and I have to be connected, because I have to be present and in connection with someone while saying something that may be unpleasant. It can also be very pleasant, saying, I think one of the hardest things for most people is to look at someone in the eyes and say, I love you, especially if they're the ones doing it first. So whether it's a good truth or maybe a challenging truth or an uncomfortable truth, to get in the habit of speaking it, and the more apprehensive we are to saying that truth to that person, the more we need to say it. The truths we're most scared to share are the ones that we really need to share if we want to heal, to reconnect, and to live a life that is truly aligned to the core of who we are.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely perfect. So, Nico, just on this note, I want to flip this conversation back to the male population. So, if I was to say to you, what do you define as true masculinity, given the work and the arena that you work in? What would your definition be on that?
Okay, well, before I give it, I want to provide some context, and it's that, like, my definition of masculinity is that it's my definition, and I think for every man, like any man that lives a masculinity that has been defined by another man is by definition not masculine. So to anyone who's listening to this, I will share the things that I found that create maybe they're like the foundations of what masculinity is, but at the end of the day, you have to come to terms with your own flavor of it. So with that being said, I think first, masculinity is, for a man, our capacity to be strong and vulnerable at the same time, to be loving, caring, but also to be able to have strong boundaries. I think that masculinity is at its roots, and maybe I might get a little philosophical or spiritual here, is presence, is conscience, conscience. It is that structure of the universe, I believe. Like it's a thing, the thing that sees, but also the thing that protects, that holds things in place. So they say the feminine is the essence and the masculine is the presence. So masculinity is our ability to be with what is, to be grounded, and to be loving, but without our love to be the challenge that I have with the word loving is that a lot of people tend to use love only as its sweet, tender, caring expression, but love can also mean strong boundaries. To love someone is to be of service. The masculine is always of service to others, and sometimes what's most of service to someone is a strong word or a well-defined boundary. So I think these are foundations for masculinity. Or masculinity, at the end of the day, is our capacity to be free because we choose to, and to be fully free for a guy means to have let go of the need for approval and validation from other people.
Nico, that's perfect. If I was to give you a device where every single person in the world could receive one message from you when it comes down to love, intimacy, and being able to feel, what would your one message be? What would you speak? What would you put out there what everyone could see?
I think it would just be this. It would just say, breathe.
What was that? Breathe.
Breathe. Yeah, I feel that.
Just give me a second, Nico. What I'm going to do, I'm going to re-ask you that. Let's get it a little bit better for the podcast. Just give me a sec. Mm-hmm. So, Nico, what I want to do is, off the topic of this conversation, is if I was to give you a device, and this device could connect to every single human across the world, and everyone could receive one message from the area of work that you work in to, for example, feel love, feel intimacy, to actually feel, what would that one message be that you were able to put out?
The message that I will put out will say, breathe.
So if we were to go into that a little bit more, why would it be breathe?
Yeah, so it might seem a little bit vague, but the one thing that is keeping us from being present to this moment, to our lovers, to our joy, to our friends, the only thing that is keeping us from there is our disconnection. Yeah, our disconnection is because we have a mental chatter that never stops. We're thinking about the future, the past, anxious about what happened or what's going to happen. And breath is the one thing that anchors us to the present moment. It is impossible to consciously take it's impossible to breathe without becoming present in that moment if we do it consciously. So I think, in the moments where we feel most disconnected, it's probably because we're in our heads, and a deep breath will really ground us and have us slow down enough so we can feel what's happening. When it comes to intimacy, if we're going through a challenging time with our partner, maybe there's a lot of disagreements and a lot of tension. We're most likely spending a lot of time in our heads, judging, planning, negotiating, trying to figure things out, and we could use a deep breath to actually connect, to slow down. And when we slow down, we're able to see things more clearly. We're able to see the other as a human being. We're able to see the challenges as an opportunity for growth. We're able to see ourselves with more compassion and love, because we slow down the mental chatter. So yeah, I think that if I could tell someone to do one thing, and everyone will hear it, to consciously take a deep breath, to really inhale, feel their heart, their lungs, like their belly expand, and let it go and sit with that.
What I love about that piece of advice is how in every single area I've had coaches on, we've had on this podcast, is it's the biggest thing is like to breathe. When you're stressed, your breath pattern goes. When you're in massive states of anxiety, your breath's gone. You can remaster that. So I love how it ties back to that grounding factor.
Yeah.
So Nico, go on, mate.
Because I find that like every other piece of advice is everyone's situation is so different, and I think that we live in a culture where coaches and mentors are in a way glorified as to have the one final answer and the one truth and the best advice, and I found that sometimes we ignore, or we, especially in my field, we disconnect from the person's inner capacity to provide their own wisdom, right? Slow down, and because they know what's best for them. So for me, in the work that I do, I try as much as possible to never give advice. Why? Because I want the person to come to their own understandings. In that way, it's they know they can rely on that ongoingly, and they're not looking for me to give them a quick solution.
Yeah, it's good. The best coaches in the world allow the person to find their answers themselves, because they tend to stick instead of giving them the answers. That's what coaching is, isn't it? Nico, in your own story, if you were to be able to think of if you could think of a time when you were your much younger self, so say between the age of like 3 and 7, and you can think of like the happiest time when you were a child, and you were able at this point in time, the Nico who I'm speaking to now, could walk back into that picture, kneel down, take the hands of the little version of himself, and give one piece of advice, knowing everything that he knows now, to set this younger version of himself up for later life, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, good question. Well, I mean, of course, first I will tell him to breathe, but after that, I will. Yeah, I will just tell him that, that yeah, I will say this to him. It is more important to learn to be whole than to be happy. What I mean by this is, through life, people are going to tell you that you need to be happy, you need to be joyful, you need to be, this ecstatic, happy, jumping person, and the moment that we're not happy, we judge ourselves. Oh, I'm feeling sad. Oh, I'm feeling a little bit lonely, or oh, I'm feeling a little bit disconnected. And I think it's terrible because it places an unrealistic expectation on us. The expectation to always be happy, and it's impossible. However, to be whole means that we embrace all of who we are, the joy just as much as the sadness, as the grief, as the excitement, as the love, as the heartbreak. And I feel that when we're able to live life with an intention to be whole and honor all of who we are, not only the good parts, it just becomes a lot easier. We realize that the bad moments are just as much a part of our experience as the good ones, and we're able to keep our heart open through the process. So I will tell young Nico to not be so concerned with being happy all the time, but rather to learn to love the parts of himself that he dislikes most, or that he thinks are not good. Yeah, and to know that, I think that, as cheesy as it sounds, that um, like everything makes sense at the end, and if it doesn't make sense, it's not the end.
I love the fact you've just said that. I read something this morning, and it was on about the universe's 3 answers to everything, and that was one of them. It was kind of like whenever you feel lost, or whenever you feel like you're going through the processes, it's like you'll get one of 3 answers. It's like 1, yes, it's time. Number 2 was no, it's not for you. And number 3 was, look, we've got something else lined up for you. And like I love the fact you've just ended on that note.
Oh.
So, Nico, look, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. I love everything that you're doing. I genuinely think the work that you're doing at the minute is absolutely phenomenal. The lives that you're touching and the message that you're putting out is something that does need to be amplified. I do feel that more people need to know this work. And I genuinely feel at the minute with this line of work, especially when it comes down to men and getting this message further out, I feel that you're at the forefront of the world opening up further to it. So, dude, I think you're doing amazing work. Keep at it. But more to the point, where can my audience, or where can our listeners find out more about you, see more of the work that you're doing, and get more of an insight into you?
All right. So I'm quite private with my coaching practice, but if someone is interested in working with me, where it's meant to have deeper, more meaningful and fulfilling relationships, or anyone who just wants a deeper sense of aliveness and to feel more connected and overall fulfilled, they can go to nicocanon.com/um, coaching. But to everyone else who just wants to stay, in touch with me, or want to see what I write, I create art, by the way. So I paint, I do poetry, and I just like writing. So my Instagram is the best channel for that. I post a lot of free stuff there, where it's insights from coaching clients, or poetry about my latest insights in life, or just reflections on things that I find from my travels. They can go. It's at Nico Canon Art. Canon only with one N. That's it.
Yeah, I strongly recommend everyone goes over there. I love following your stuff. It's like, I think everything I've seen from you, you inspire me with the pictures, because you're always somewhere new in the world. I genuinely believe that travel's the biggest thing for everyone. But every single piece of content has got such a powerful message attached to it, which I absolutely love, which is why we're having this conversation now. So I strongly recommend that everyone heads over there and follows your work. But Nico, look, my friend, I love what you're doing. I just want to say a big thank you for taking this time and coming on the show. Two men having a drink and speaking about all things love, intimacy, and relationships. So, my man, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks to you, Simon. Yeah, I loved our conversation. I'm very happy.
No doubt it will be the start of many more to come.
Sweet.